Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name is Jeff Demaray with GE. We're going to start our program right now. I'd like to introduce Mr. Sam Williams, who's going to kick off the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And it's good to be back at the Atlanta Press Club. A lot of old friends and reporters here. We always try to return your phone calls and meet your deadlines. But I do think that there are one or two of you in the room that are tapping our phones at the chamber about the stories that we're doing to recruit companies. So we won't say anything about who they might be, but we're glad to have you here. Glad to have you here today, and we're honored to be a guest of yours. I've been asked to introduce John Rice, and it's hard for me to do that because I've known John so well and for so long, and we've worked on so many things together. I met John when he first came to Atlanta, and then went out to visit him the first year he was here. I remember having lunch with him and immediately asking him to get involved in the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And I remember he was saying, "I don't have much time," and I said, "Well, it won't take much time."
I've never forgotten those words.
But I would say to you that John has made an incredible impact on this metro area and this state in his leadership. And when he first came here, he ran the energy business, which was the first part of GE to move here. And then he was named vice chairman of the company. And in the midst of all of that, with the leadership at GE, I think it's very interesting to me that a global company of this nature changed its culture to become sustainable and environmentally conscious, particularly when a lot of their customers are the utility industry and the transportation industry, whom some might think are not so conscious about this. But I think it's a great attribute that GE is really setting the standard now, not only for its own behavior, but for the behavior of the customers whom it serves, and in the end, the consumers and the citizens of our planet. When the company was reorganized last summer, to its current form, GE is really three companies. There are infrastructure, finance, which is GE Capital, and the media company, NBC, and all of their news divisions. John assumed operational leadership for the technology infrastructure division, which is the largest division of GE. Now listen to this. They're responsible for $46 billion of revenue. That's aircraft engines, locomotives, healthcare equipment. And in the past month, the biggest news coming out of GE is from John's team, more than $10 billion in aviation orders. And I know he just came from the Paris Air Show as well. And also a brand new environmentally friendly freight locomotive. Maybe we could get one of those, Maria, for commuter rail or high-speed rail. Aircraft engines, and game-changing health innovations, the health imagination. And I know as a cancer survivor, I'm deeply grateful for GE's technology that helped diagnose and help treat my cancer. So I've got a personal experience with GE products. But also, you'd never know from reading about the work that John does that he's a very humble, unassuming guy. And I think that his employees are deeply loyal to him, as we've learned from a lot of GE folks that we know, because John also sets a very high standard and aims very high for what he does, but he also communicates that and participates in the true sense with employees in setting those goals and has a lot of empathy for them and understanding what it takes to get there. And I think among the CEOs that I've known, and I've had the pleasure of having 11 CEOs as my chairman, because every year I get a new boss, John really, really stands out in that characteristic. And I think talking about his leadership business with the chamber, I couldn't remember some of the things because it was 5 years ago when he was chairman, so I got the minute book out of the library, and I started thumbing through it about things that John had done. I was like, oh my God, I can remember that. How about this one? Sonny Perdue, newly elected governor, the business community killed the idea of a Confederate flag being on the referendum. There was a compromise referendum, for those of you that have been here in the city, and the Confederate battle flag was not on the ballot, but there was a new flag on the ballot nicknamed the Sonny Perdue flag, and the old flag, which was nicknamed the Roy Barnes flag. Some of you are chuckling, remember that. But John led the business community in the battle of the flags to come out of that trying to reconcile the differences and the hostilities and the confrontation that occurred during that time. And now it's just a signpost in the history of our state. But at the time, it was a huge, huge issue. That was in January of that year, and the referendum occurred in, I think, March or April. Right after that, some of you who were here also remember that Mayor Franklin was given a federal court order, clean up the sewers and commence the program within 90 days or your water taps will be cut off. The aquarium under construction will have no water. And she came to the Metro Chamber, and John put together, remember Lee Thomas, who was at that time the vice chairman of Georgia Pacific, a task force to go to the General Assembly, work out a compromise to allow the city of Atlanta to have a penny sales tax referendum. That was an incredible feat because the state government in those days, and to some even now, is not in the mind of giving the city of Atlanta an opportunity to tax itself for any other purposes. So those to me are two great, great markers. And another one was that when John was chairman, his real passion was public education. And he became a great champion of Beverly Hall and helping her with the Atlanta school system. And later, well, I think just last year, GE gave a $20 million grant to the Atlanta public school systems for their reform efforts. And he also started a regional education platform of gathering together the 16 superintendents in Metro Atlanta to talk to each other about best practices. And that created a relationship of partnering among superintendents that, to me, is really last until this day. As if that's not enough, John is also on the board of trustees at Emory University, the Walker School, and his alma mater, Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. And he's also on the advisory board of King Fahd University in Saudi Arabia. And, of course, he's still on the board of the Metro Atlanta Chamber. We don't let go of former chairmen, so we like to keep them in service, and John has helped us anytime we've asked for help. So I'm very proud to introduce you today to a very, very significant leader who still calls Atlanta home, even though he probably sleeps on an airplane more than in his own bed. John, thank you for being here today. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your remarks were too kind, and you gave me far too much credit for a lot of stuff that other people did that I was maybe around the fringe of. And that's one of the things that you love about this place. And as Sam mentioned, I moved here in 2000, and at the time I'm now in my 30th year with GE. At that point, it was 22 years, and it was my 12th move. So I knew something about moving and something about living in different cities and communities. I've been outside the U.S. 3 times, Canada twice, and Singapore. So I had a basis for comparison. And when I arrived here, it was very clear within weeks that this was a community which wasn't without its issues, but was full of people who really did want to make a difference. People who weren't necessarily being interested in being in the news, but wanted to grapple with issues, whether it was our mayor, whether it was Beverly Hall, the superintendent of schools, the business community at large. If you presented a group with an issue and said we need some volunteers, you typically had plenty. So it was and is today a place that kind of sucks you in from a community perspective. Just a couple of statistics on what we are here in Georgia. GE, 5,000 employees around the state. We're very proud of our community service. About 20% of these people, or about 1,000, volunteer on a regular basis. And in our world, that typically doesn't mean you take a day off and help in some community activity. You get up every day and you're thinking about what you got to do for customers and shareholders, and then in your free time, you give back to the community. So these are people that have full-time jobs and find a way to give back. We're very proud of our association with the public education effort here. This goes back 15 years or more with the now Maynard Jackson High School in the city. We've been working for them with a long time, and most recently we gave them $1 million a few years ago to improve on a college-bound grant. So this is to improve the number of kids that graduate from that school and move on to some form of secondary education. In 2004, 36% of the kids that graduated from Maynard Jackson did this. This year, 86%. So, and we don't take all the credit for that by any means. Dr. Shepard, now Dr. Carter, who's the principal of that school, they deserve all the credit. We just gave them a little bit of help. We've allocated $150 million to 6 public school systems around the country to develop capabilities in math and science, and one of those school systems is here in Atlanta, and with an investment that we're making with Dr. Hall and her leadership team. And the only thing I'll say about that is, look, we had hundreds of places to choose from, and we decided Atlanta needed to be one of them, not because that we're perfect here when it comes to public education. We're on a journey, and Dr. Hall and her administration are really making huge steps to improve outcomes. And no matter where we send our kids to school, public or private, charter or otherwise, if the public school systems don't make it in the United States, we're going to lose our competitive advantage. And so that's why the company, as well as many of our employees, has really made a statement about this. GE today, I'll talk a little bit about GE today in the current context, and then about some of our directions. Last year, we ended the year with $182 billion in revenue. We made $17 billion, a bunch of that in financial services. And as Sam pointed out, we have a big financial service component that we think does quite well in the context of financial services today. But as you all know well, it's a tough neighborhood. And it's been a concern to all investors. We're really quite proud with how our financial service business has been operating in this environment, and we love our industrial portfolio because we're involved in businesses that are going to matter for a long, long time. If you think about what the president talks about when he talks about stimulus and renewal, he always talks about renewable energy. He always talks about healthcare IT. He will talk about renewing the rail system. And Sam mentioned high-speed rail. We're involved in that. So when you think about renewing the infrastructure, not just in this country, but in many countries around the world, we think it plays to our strengths. So while there's no question that the next few months, who knows how many, 12, 18, are going to be tough because credit markets aren't functioning the way we'd all like them to, and we are in a tough part of the economic cycle. When you look through that and you say, well, what is the world going to need, right, over the next 5 decades? Clean water, more affordable health care available to more people, affordable energy from sources that don't contribute to global warming, transportation, the ability to move people around and move freight around, and those are the kind of businesses that we're involved in. So whether you talk about stimulus in the United States or in any one of the other literally dozens of countries that have big stimulus programs right now, it's all being concentrated toward infrastructure. There are several billion people in this world that don't have access to affordable energy, clean water, adequate health care. Many more of them than you would think right here in the United States. There's 50 million people in the United States that have to go to the emergency room to get some form of treatment. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. in this country. There's lots of ways to solve it, and you hear discussions about most of them in your newspapers and media outlets today and in many others. It's a complicated problem to solve, but we're going to be part of the solution. We launched several weeks ago an effort we call Health Imagination, and it was a real stake in the ground for us, just like we did the same thing on the environment 3 or 4 years ago with Eco-Imagination. And just to refresh your memory, we said we're going to double our investment in environmentally responsible technologies to $1.5 billion a year. This was over a multi-year period we would do this. We would increase the amount of revenue that comes from these activities. We would do all this in a manner that's open and transparent. We would have an external group come in and vet what we said we were doing, so there wouldn't be a question, we hoped, about how real our commitment was. And we then added another piece on water. We said that we were going to reduce our consumption of water by 20% over our reference period, even as our company grew. It was kind of a line in the sand for us, and a way for us to demonstrate to ourselves, to our employees, and to our external constituents that we were serious about solving some of these problems. And we're into the mission. We're not at the end, but we're meeting or exceeding every one of the commitments that we've made. And as you see now, if you go back 5 years, part of the world was talking about global warming, but not all of it. And today it's front and center in a lot of discussions that take place every day, everywhere. We think health is the same thing, right? Health is maybe even more important no matter where I go, and I visit lots of countries every year. We do business in 130. Health is on everybody's mind. Everybody cares about it, whether you have nationalized health care in China or in Canada and the UK or some other system. You care about affordability, accessibility, and better outcomes. And that's what we've wrapped Health Imagination around. We've put real significant commitments out there about our role in participating in cost reduction. And we understand that we're maybe just a few links in a long chain that delivers health care and creates outcome. But between equipment, our healthcare IT business, and our life sciences businesses, we have the most complete portfolio, and we think we have a much bigger role to play. And we've started by saying, you know, we're going to help take cost out of the system. We're going to improve accessibility. We're going to find ways to deliver basic health care to the 50 million people in the U.S. today that don't have ready access to it. We're also going to kind of help our own house live healthier. We have 300,000 employees around the world. Healthcare costs for us is $2.5 billion a year. So our shareholders are paying a pretty good sized bill. The outcomes aren't what we always want them to be. We want to help our employees lead healthier lives, have better health outcomes, and we want to reduce cost so that our shareholders benefit in addition to our employees. So we're modeling Health Imagination like we developed Eco-Imagination, and we think that it's going to be something that sets our company apart, but really ups the ante, if you will, raises the bar in terms of our ability to participate in this raging debate about how we do all this in a world that can't afford more money, right? I mean, this is already a very expensive proposition, not just here in the United States, but in a lot of places. And we and other companies can do more to help address it. We really think, whether you're talking about the environment or you're talking about healthcare, if you want truly sustainable solutions, you have to attract capital, right? If you're going to solve global warming, you need to attract capital. If you're going to reduce healthcare costs, not that let them increase 10 or 12 or 15% a year, if you're really going to solve big, tough problems, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, things like that, you need to be attracting capital. And to do that, you've got to get companies involved. And you have to encourage them to bring their capital and invest and expect to get, over time, some kind of a return. we're used to taking the long-term view. If you look at the businesses where we have pretty good market success, our aviation business, where we have the majority market share in commercial engines, you invest, it takes you 10 years to develop a jet engine like we're doing now for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner that will fly, we think, at the end of this month. A new engine for something like that costs between $2 and $3 billion and takes maybe 10 years to become cash positive. It's great business if you figure out how to do that. It's not for people that don't have the stomach for it. That's why there's only a handful of companies that do it. But my point in bringing it up is because I think it demonstrates that we're very capable of taking the long-term view. This is, we balance short and long-term all the time. And whether you talk about aviation, whether you're talking about our energy business, which has to do the same thing, if you want to think about the development of next-generation healthcare technologies, they're all long-term bets that require you to do things over the course of years and sometimes decades in order to deliver for both your customers and your shareholders. So we're used to doing it. We have to work through cycles. This is a particularly tough cycle, right? Because it's the combination of a bad economy and tough financial markets. And it's always interesting to me when you go through a cycle. It's one advantage, I guess, of being around a company for 30 years. You get to see a few cycles. And you do realize that, when times are good, you never think they're going to be bad. And when times are bad, you never think they're going to be good. And we're in one of those times are bad. Maybe the question is, when are they going to be good, not if, but we're all waiting to see. I'm not particularly of the green shoot group quite yet, because I haven't seen it in our order patterns yet, but we will have a turnaround. So the question for us is, how do you invest through the cycle? And you, green shoot group? Yeah, that's the group that is looking at the ground and seeing green come out and wondering if those are the future blooms of a good economy, right? Yeah, no, and so I hear the talk about green shoots, and all I'm saying at the macro level there may be some statistics which suggest that the economy is starting to turn, but I'm not seeing it yet. And this is a little bit of the show me the money crowd, and when our orders start reflecting that, then I'll jump in with them. But that doesn't mean you still don't continue to invest and revitalize your businesses, because if you're thinking about the work we're doing for Boeing or any one of our significant infrastructure customers, you just don't turn the spigot on and turn it off because the economy is a little tougher now than we thought it might be 12 months ago. So we combine the big pillar efforts like eco-imagination and health imagination to help transform our company. And it's not marketing stuff. I mean, we do talk about it, but we are changing the way we think about our healthcare business in the context of health imagination. For us to be successful in what we've committed, we will be running a fundamentally different healthcare business in two or three years from now. So it's both an outward and an inward set of efforts to transform what we are, who we are, and how we contribute. And you don't get to be, we've been around for 130 years, and there's a couple of cycles every decade and a big depression in the middle of that period, and you don't weather those storms unless you have a view of the long term. And so, I'm fortunate to be responsible for a group of businesses that are good at working their way through cycles, make investments that deliver over the long term, and solve fundamental problems, right? I mean, it's going to take us a while to serve the needs of the 2 billion underserved people in the world. Decades, not years. And that's why no matter what the current economic framework, I am a glass more than half full person when it comes to thinking about the future and our ability to contribute. Now what I'd like to do is take any questions that you have. I'm happy to address any subject you'd like to talk about. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
For a while. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, and underutilized equipment is a big contributor to higher healthcare costs. And so our effort needs to be less about trying to put high-priced equipment into a facility that thinks they need it but really don't. I mean, we can't force two institutions to work together, so there's an element of the problem that we can't solve. But what we can do is deliver more affordable equipment that maybe in some of these outlying areas doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but has the right bells and whistles for that kind of first level of care that's necessary to handle most of the patients. And then the patients that might require a more sophisticated level of diagnostic imaging screening, for example, would go to a different hospital for that. It's very important. And, we have one great example that we have is our ultrasound team that is developing, and part of this work is being done in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Part of it's being done in Paris, outside of Paris, France, in Buc, and part of it's being done in China, portable ultrasound, so that you can, if you're a pregnant woman in a remote location, not just in China, but maybe Wyoming or Montana, you don't have to drive 100 miles to get a fetal scan. You could have someone do it right there and then transmit the image so that it could be read by a doctor or a suitable person in a hospital that's located far away from you. And that technology is a lot less expensive than the traditional ultrasound technology that was maybe offered 10 years ago. So instead of pushing the limits of outer space, we're actually bringing innovation down to more mainstream capabilities. So when you talk about accessibility and reaching remote areas, you need to think portable, lower cost, an image quality that's really good, but not probably as good as what you would get with a stationary piece of equipment, but it's going to handle 80% of the patients that might need monitoring or screening. Yes?
I'm curious, since you have seen so many cycles in your career, it seems like we're currently in a phase that the American public is really supporting a lot of government intervention through investments, through bailouts, through partnerships. President Obama says this fall is going to be focused on healthcare reform. Where is the fine balance being that you're in the private sector and the public sector to see if you find an equitable solution?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm also a taxpayer, so I'm, and one of the things we've said as we've defined health imagination is we really want to be part of a system that does smart things. If you're familiar with the Deficit Reduction Act that took place, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago. Basically, the government said we're going to reduce reimbursement rates because diagnostic imaging and screening has gotten out of hand. It's too expensive. We're going to reduce reimbursement rates. Our first reaction to that was, oh, geez, it's awful, but it'll only last for a while and it'll come back, right? With health imagination, we've kind of driven a stake in the ground and said, no, not only is it not going to come back, it shouldn't come back. And our job is to help reduce the overall cost of imaging and screening, working with the government, which is going to have a reimbursement rate factor in the new world, the new legislation, and we've got to be part of that. And we can't be the one banging on the door saying, "Hey, they got to go up. They got to go up." We've got to develop the capability, the technology, and the equipment which will allow it to come down, or at least stay the same, but not go up at a factor of 2 or 3 times inflation like it had over the years. Well, look, there are a lot of smart people, although my degree is in economics. I stopped doing that stuff a long time ago, and there are a lot of smart people analyzing how we got where we are, when we're going to come out, and I am not going to pretend to be smarter than them. All I'll tell you is we don't see the rebound yet in our order patterns. We see a world where good companies and good consumers can't get all the credit that they would like, and you've seen examples. Maybe some of you are an example in this room where you've paid all your bills on time, you've done everything right, and you get a letter from the credit card company saying your credit line's been reduced. Well, until that changes, I don't think you're going to see a consumer-led recovery. And I'm not talking about bad credits. I'm talking about good credits. Good people pay their bills all the time, on time, now get credit restriction. And the same thing's true with companies. Companies who have lots of cash on the balance sheet, are paying their bills, are worried about whether they're going to get what they need to fund working capital, and as a result, they're cutting back on discretionary expenditures. And until that changes, I don't think you're going to have a significant rebound. Now, when it will change, and I think when it does, it will happen quickly, but predicting the quarter is beyond my capability. So we're preparing for 12 or 18 months of tough sledding. It will come back, and when it comes back, the businesses that have been aggressive about how they manage cost and how they're reshaping things right now are going to bounce back in a very strong way. Maria.
I'll shift to a little bit more local. You travel all around the world. You go to many different cities. And looking at Atlanta and Georgia, could you talk to us about what you see are the greatest threats or challenges to our economic growth and our quality of life? And also, could you talk about the future gubernatorial election or other state offices and also the mayoral election in terms of what we should be looking for in a candidate?
That's in your usual style. That's 8 questions in one.
But I did it within that.
I'll do my best.
I think he'd make a great governor.
I'll do my best.
Are you interested in
No, I'm not. So I took the last question first. Look, one of the reasons that we came to Atlanta 10 years ago, or Georgia, and the metro, is because we saw a business-friendly climate. And since we've been here, it's, I think, even gotten friendlier, and that's, there's been one mayor during that time, but 2 different governors. And one of the things I think that's really important, and one of the things I like about what the Metro Chamber and the Georgia Chamber do, is it's a little bit about attracting new companies, which is always good, and also a lot about keeping the companies you have here, and thinking about expanding. For every company that comes to Georgia or to the metro area, they leave a place. And you can do your own research on why they leave, but in our case, we left because, we thought Atlanta would be a great place to be located. We loved the geographic proximity to customers in the Southeast. We loved the airport and access globally, and we didn't think we'd be taken for granted here. And so it's not just getting them here, it's keeping them here. And sometimes it's easier, the nameplate is to get a new company headquarters, but there's a lot of economic growth in getting the companies you have here to expand and not think about doing it someplace else. And I think there's threat number one is if you take your current constituents for granted and assume that because they're here, they'll stay. Because they may, and moving is hard, but they may not grow. They may not invest. They may not add those next 100 jobs here. They may put them someplace else. Globally, the biggest threat is avoiding change. I was speaking with the Lieutenant Governor's group recently in Washington, and we were talking about what they needed to do in their states. And one of the things that states that get it right concentrate on what their strengths are, and don't try to be a mile wide and an inch deep. There are some industries and some jobs where you're not competitive, and and maybe should end up being somewhere else. but many strengths in this state, many strengths in this metro area where look at the education, look at the capabilities that you get with an Emory, with a Georgia Tech, with the Georgia, with all the schools that are in this area. That's a huge competitive advantage. We can leverage it. And
The gubernatorial election.
well, look, there's a number of people who have expressed an interest in being governor, and I'm not one of them and won't be one of them. I'm confident that we're gonna get a great leader out of that mix. I think we have a community that's very engaged in the process. It's very important to get good legislation out. It's clear, and I think the last session, was a difficult one for us, and there were a lot of people in the business community that were frustrated by what didn't happen in the last legislative session. And so we're all interested in who the next governor will be, and I'm not going to handicap it. I'm confident that we'll end up with a great leader, and I feel the same thing about the mayoral race. I'm personally supporting Lisa Borders because I think she'd be a wonderful candidate in every respect, and can pick up where Shirley Franklin has left off. And I'll tell you, one of the things about Atlanta has been the great mayoral leadership that Shirley Franklin has shown in taking on tough issues. Sam mentioned the sewer, easily an issue that could have been put off. You talk about balancing short-term and long-term. She could have moonwalked on that issue, and she didn't. And I just think having leaders who will take on the tough issues is really important. She's done it. She's going to leave a great legacy when her second term ends, and I'd like to see Lisa take her place. Yeah.
I'd like to get back to health government. Washington has struggled with healthcare policy for at least half a century. And this White House and Democratic leaders on the Hill are saying there's going to be a bill that doesn't get signed by the end of the year. That's moving kind of fast. This is a very media-savvy White House. They changed the concept of how campaigns are conducted. They may not have yet entirely converted that model into how they run White House meetings. But we've got something else to play today that is radically different than any previous time in healthcare conversation, and that's social media. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the kind of role that we're going to see social media play in healthcare over the next 6 months. Social media as it's used by the White House, or social media as it's used by millions of Americans who want to talk about it?
I think it's a great question. In fact, we've started to reshape how we think about our whole communications effort and where we get information from. And we're on the blogs and Twitter. I've learned more about that in the last 6 months, and driven, certainly in part, if not in principle, by the success of the Obama campaign. We've hired some of the people that worked with both campaigns because, frankly, they succeeded in doing something which is going to transform how we deliver information, how we receive information, how we connect with a distributed network of people. And I think that's it. There is a huge difference now in terms of outreach and the impact of the daily press briefing versus what happens through all these other social media outlets. It's enormous. We're looking at the technology behind Facebook in some of our businesses to manage information flows. It's taking us into another generation of learning. So I think it's an enormously powerful thing. Look at what's happening in Iran and how we're getting access to information. Tidbits, snippets, but enough when you string them all together to give you a sense of what's going on in a place where that never would have been possible maybe 5 years ago, right? Huge. Or 5 months ago, right?
I want to go back to the sessions real quick. It seems that Georgia Power has been able to get whatever they wanted out of the legislature, whereas the chambers have had a tougher time at it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not sure that Mike or Dave Ratcliffe would say they've gotten everything they wanted out of the legislature. But look, I think it's, legislatures are complicated. And, and I had a firsthand look at this with respect to a school board governance legislation that we were trying to get passed. And to me, that was like the biggest no-brainer of it all. That's like a logic test. If you showed that to 1,000 people, 1,000 will say, I thought you were already doing it, right?
I mean, that's what I remember, but it's like it just didn't go anywhere.
Well, yeah, and it didn't. And I think there were, and for those of you that saw the op-ed piece we wrote, for some very specific reasons. And I hope that some lessons were learned as a result of that. And I won't speak in behalf of the chamber, but I can tell you from my perspective as a business person who puts a lot of time and energy into this state, we're not going to stand for it anymore, right? This is ridiculous. When good legislation that is only designed to help kids finish their high school education and get a decent one and maybe move on to something else, when that stuff doesn't get passed for totally political reasons, you can't take it sitting down. And so the lesson for me is I'm going to stand up and be counted. And maybe I'm guilty because in years past I would have said, okay, well, we tried hard, we'll try again next time. Well, this time we didn't say that, right? And so maybe it's a personal learning on my part that because on Monday morning after that legislation didn't pass on Friday night, I was not interested in sitting down or walking away. And I can tell you that nobody in the chamber was, and nobody among the other business leaders that were involved in that process were interested. And maybe that's what we have to do. Yes?
What do you think Georgia can do? You travel all over the country, the world. What do you think Georgians should do to make education a priority, not only from a business standpoint, but the chamber, all of the stakeholders?
I think it is. I mean, I honestly, if you look who's the superintendent of the year, right? Dr. Beverly Hall. If you look at the progress that's being made there, it's real and it's demonstrable. Everybody, including the leadership team at APS, wants more to happen faster. But if you look at what she inherited in 1999, a totally dysfunctional school board, and she as a leader had to spend 40% of her time managing up. Now, who in your right mind, would any of you want a job where you had to spend 40% of your time managing your bosses? I don't think so. So getting that sorted out took a couple of years and and it was the chamber that led the effort really to create a process by which good people would run for school board and actually get elected. And so now you have a board which is not dysfunctional, and understand what a board's role is, right? A board's role isn't to manage where the school bus stops or who gets hired to be the custodian in school X, right? A board's role is to help the superintendent, to pick the superintendent, to lead with the superintendent, and not to run the day-to-day school operation. Well, we've just now in the past 5 or 6 years been able to get to that point. So problems that took 20 years to create are going to take a while to fix. And I can tell you, and I go back again to the GE commitment, we had 10 other places where we could have put that $22 million, right? Big GE cities that would have been attractive places, and we chose Atlanta not because we saw enough going on here and a reason for investing and a real reason to think that the community was going to get a return on this investment. Yes?
Get back to healthcare for a minute. Of course, we've got a system that a lot of people don't have faith in. We've got about 50% of people are in some kind of government healthcare, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, Indian Health Services, or the VA. I mean, we've got a system that are basically running on old models. Okay, and the president's talked about savings and that sort of thing. But is the biggest obstacle to this going to be convincing the American people that it's not going to just be more of the same?
Right.
Because the goal for a long time has been, by multiple administrations, has been, what are we going to do about the uninsured? But the model hasn't changed.
Right. I think that there has to be some way to help the uninsured and underinsured, so some kind of a pool. I personally don't believe that a national health care system is necessary. I lived in Canada. I experienced that. There are advantages to that system, but there are distinct disadvantages, and I'd like to try to accomplish what we want to accomplish without going there. I think that private insurance, employer-paid insurance should be part of the outcome because you have companies that are paying and are willing to pay, and I don't think you should throw that piece of it out. Though the most important piece that's missing, I think, is a way to educate, inform, and incent consumers who need to be more knowledgeable. You're more knowledgeable about the plasma TV that you buy than you are about the procedure you're going to get when you go to the hospital. And I don't think that is a way to make it work. I mean, there are no real incentive. If you're insured, there aren't a lot of incentives for you to manage your own health care. And the system is not perfect. I mean, right? We all know that. So I think that one of the things we're going to have to do is create a more informed group of consumers. All of us in this room, I can be smarter about it, who will manage and have incentives to manage their own personal health care. One of the things in terms of our internal activities, one of the things we're going to do is create real incentives for healthy lifestyle choices. So if you smoke, you're going to pay more for insurance. If you don't smoke, you'll pay less. If you do everything you can possibly do to lead the healthiest lifestyle you can lead, we're going to create incentives for that because there are some of these are choices that we can make, right? Yes?
I understand GE has a very big nuclear division, but that you don't currently have any plants in the United States. But there are a lot of states that are looking at nuclear. Are you satisfied with the amount of interest you're getting in the United States? And my second question is about your stock price. It's trading closer to your one-year low than your one-year high.
Yep.
And I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the nuclear one, just quickly, it's a good-sized nuclear business, but in the scheme of things, it's about 0.5% of our total revenue. So it's about $1 billion in revenue on that 187 billion. So it's important and sizable, but not enormous. And we are very interested, and we have about 100 reactors, I think, operating in the United States. There's 100 reactors operating in the United States, and we have probably 25 or 30% of those. Do you know that, Catherine?
I don't know off the top of my head, Rachel, but
So we have operating reactors, but look, the reactors in the United States were all completed in the 80s, but before the 80s, most of them before the 80s. They will reach their 60th birthday by 2040. So whether they're our design or another manufacturer's design, they're going to have to be replaced. And nuclear provides 16 or 17% of the power generation in the United States. There isn't another technology that can replace that. Even wind, you'd have to have 150,000 wind turbines to do it. So it's really important that new plant construction start, and you saw something the other day where the government has identified five companies that would get loan guarantees, 4 or 5. Very important that gets started because we need to be building, if you think about the math, between 2010 and 2040, it's 30 years, you got 100 reactors to replace. Just to stay even, you need to be building 3 a year. So there's going to be plenty of business for everybody, and we're quite happy to be part of this process, not concerned about whether we're number 1 or number 2, because this thing has a long tail. With respect to the stock price, I mean, a big part of our stock price right now is a function of the financial markets. And the fact that there is, bless you, the fact that there's so much concern about capital and credit that they're not assigning a lot of value to our financial service business. Well, as I said, we have a lot of confidence in the team that's running these businesses. You may know that we get involved in mid-market lending. So, for example, aircraft leasing is a big business that we have. Energy, we invest in power projects. And we think these are valuable franchises for a long, long time. So part of our challenge with respect to today's stock price is we're being painted by the same paintbrush that's painting all the banks and all the other financial service companies, and we think that over time the markets will recognize that we have a little bit different portfolio, and that will certainly help improve our stock price. And we're all working hard at that. Plus, the industrial businesses, will have to continue doing their part. I think we have time for one more question, if that's okay.
There's been trends over the years, you talk about cycles where companies, mergers and acquisitions are in favor, and GE was built a lot on that. There's been movement recently towards spin-offs and out of favor of some mergers and acquisitions, and even articles from different business magazines whether GE or parts of GE should be split off, and it's an outmoded, anachronistic situation. You just talk to that.
Well, to me, and I've always felt this way when we talked a little bit about Enron's wind turbine business that we acquired in 2002 was $300 million in revenue, and this past year was $6 billion for us. So good timing, a little fortuitous, and we had to work to fix the business. But that's the part that people miss with acquisitions. It's not buying the business, it's what you do to integrate it. That's where you really unlock the shareholder value so I don't worry about the fact, certainly don't worry about the fact that we've made a lot of acquisitions over the last 10 years because a lot of companies have. It's what we've done or can continue to do to integrate them. So, for example, our healthcare business is equipment, healthcare IT, and life sciences. And we're still working to integrate those business segments. I wouldn't give us an A on that. I'd give us about a B, maybe. And to me, that's all upside because we have a portfolio that nobody else can match. Each segment has to do what it needs to do, right, to win in its domain. And when we leverage these technologies horizontally, we'll have stuff that no other company can do. So it's more to come. But my interest is in making sure that integration takes place, right? Without the integration, you've bought a horse and you put the jockey on and you say ride hard, but you're not going to do any better than the previous owner.
Even at vice chair of one of four divisions, you're looking at all the products you just mentioned in healthcare, you're looking at locomotive engines in Erie, Pennsylvania, you're looking at aircraft, different parts. I mean, do you split your brain in 3 or 4 different parts?
Sure. More than that usually. And I also sit on the GE Capital Board, and so I get involved in the financial side of our business. I'm in all of the leadership discussions that involve energy and NBC Universal. So that's what leaders do is shift gears a lot during the day. On the disposition side, to me there's 3 questions you have to ask when you consider whether a business should be part of your portfolio or somebody else's. The first question is can somebody else run it better than you can? Right? The second question is, will that somebody pay a fair price, a fully valued price, in a way that works for both sets of shareholders? You have the selling set and the buying set. And then the third question that nobody ever seems to ask when they talk about what are you going to buy, what are you going to sell, is what do you do with the proceeds in a way that benefits shareholders over the long run? You can issue a special dividend. You can do stuff like that. But that's a one-time thank you today thing that doesn't cause people 3 or 4 or 5 years from now to want to buy the GE stock. And so you got to ask and answer all 3 questions in the right way in order for you to decide, well, this is a business that would be better off somewhere else than it is with us. So we don't get up every day looking at what we can sell, although, as you've seen, we're not adverse to doing that. But it's got to make sense for a couple of sets of shareholders, because we assume that there aren't a lot of dummies out there, and if there's somebody who's going to pay us full value for one of our businesses, they're going to have a way to make it attractive for their shareholders and accretive. Well, listen, this has been great. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I know the press club wants to be respectful of yours, and we've passed the 1 o'clock mark, so I'll take the blame for screwing that up. But your questions were great, and we appreciate your comments and all you're doing to help inform people in this region about what's going on. Thanks.